Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Amita Bide from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. This is a module on dynamics of participation as part of the paper on community organization. Participation, a lot of the study of participation tends to be a very conceptual and a theoretical understanding of participation. So if you start looking at models of participation, approaches to participation, the overall context of participation is something all of which focuses on how do you locate participation in an overall dynamic of change. However, for community practitioners themselves, they need to understand participation and community both as empirical categories themselves. And the minute we approach both community and participation as empirical categories, one begins to understand that there are certain dynamics that will kind of tend to transcend the entire way in which participation is actually conceptualized and perhaps cut through all of the different models and the varying approaches of community participation. And hence, what we will try to do in this module is basically understand dynamics of participation and understand how these dynamics are actually relevant in contemporary community practice. So, what are those questions which are critical when we say dynamics of participation? So, we basically try to engage with who participates, why people participate. We also engage with the question of what are the stages that participation must actually go through. And finally, we also look at guidelines for choosing what are the right approaches in order to address all of these questions. Coming to the question of who participates. Now here we have to realize that participation is an extremely contested terrain. Now when we say contested terrain, what I mean to say is that there are many people who would like to believe that the kind of work that they are doing is participatory. So it is a very used term. But on the other hand, it is also a very abused term. As Robert Chambers says, all too often participation proclaimed on the platform actually becomes appropriation and privilege when translated into action in the field. What does he say? This is basically the entire difference between a call for participation and actual actions of participation and who actually becomes part of those. So, who participates in a participatory effort is a question that one has to be constantly alive to. Whether it is the landlords in the village, whether it is the privileged in the village, whether it is so-called representatives, but rather the people who have a strong base of resources in the village, or whether the methods of participation are also able to attract the most excluded in a village. It may be women, it may be tribals. Are we able to reach out to them? How are they included? In a meeting in a city, are we able to actually bring in the people who are tenants in a slum, or is it only restricted to those who are owners of hutments? So I think particularly the question here is two things, that most studies of participation actually reveal that people who tend to participate are largely those who have some degree of economic resources. So they tend to be the little better off. I wouldn't say necessarily only the well off, but the better off in particular localities. They often tend to be the more privileged in terms of power. So most often you would see the men, most often you would also see people who speak for the community. So people like leaders, etc., would automatically come ahead. What is necessary is to make special efforts to reach out to those who are at the bottom most. And there is no simple solution to this about the issue of who participates, because especially for practitioners, one would see that sometimes it is a challenge to get people to be interested in a project. So who participates is a dynamic question. It is not a question of I design and that person then compulsorily participates. That very rarely happens, because there is such an element of voluntarism and self-selection in the entire business of participation. So this is not a simple issue, mind you, but at the same time we need to be alive of who participates. Okay? I'll give you an example for this. In Maharashtra, you first had Gram Sabhas in villages. Gram Sabhas are village assemblies which are supposed to take a decision about the overall expenditures, budgets, and how they are to be spent in a village. They are to also decide beneficiaries for different schemes. The experience of many of these Gram Sabhas is basically that either they tend to be tokenistic, but even when they are not tokenistic and tend to be genuine assemblies of all the people in the village, you will basically find and observe that women are located on one side of that assembly and who hardly ever speak up. Therefore, to get over this problem of actually including the women, several organizations came up with the idea of a Mahila Sabha, which is held prior to the Gram Sabha. Now these special assemblies of women in the village are forums then where women can express a little more freely. And this has certainly helped. This has certainly helped to advance the agendas of women. But on the other hand, if you look at the overall way in which the budget is spent, then the Mahila Sabhas are restricted to a 10% share of the budget of the overall village Gram Panchayat. Now this talks about then who participates and on what terms. The second aspect perhaps that we need to also keep in mind is when we reach out to the excluded, this can often generate an animosity amongst those who are in a privileged position. For example, if you deliberately reach out only to the laborers in a village or the tribals in the village and leave out the main sections, okay, there is definitely an animosity created that these are people who are out to create enmity in the village and raise conflicts in a village. Similarly, reaching out to women to participate in self-help groups definitely is threatening to men. But therefore, practitioners of participation need to be aware of all of these different balances. How does one reach out? Why does one reach out? And how to get the who really excluded in while not upsetting the balance of power relations in villages, in communities, right at the first go. So this is about the question of who participates. We now move to the next question, and which is about why do people participate. Okay? Just as we have considered who, it is important to also consider why. And here Alan Tweltrees talks about law of participation. Okay? What is this law of participation? Basically, Tweltrees asserts that if people participate because they have an incentive and a reason to participate, that is the law of participation. Okay? Often, practitioners of communities expect people to be altruistic and participate just like that. These kind of expectations of altruism are very likely to lead to frustration, because people are much more linked to their family, they are much more linked to the social groups than to actual community processes. Okay? You may have often seen in cities, perhaps within your own communities, in your own societies, that even for a community celebration, there are very, very few people who will actually come ahead. When it comes to taking responsibility, thinking of a cooperative society, very rarely would you find that there is a cent per cent assembly, right? This is a law that one has to accept. So therefore, people participate because they have a reason to participate. And therefore, practitioners need to think of actually giving these and creating valid reasons for participation. Okay? But now when I say valid reasons, these are not necessarily only incentives, mind you. People don't come for meetings, people don't participate in projects only because they are given a free meal for that matter, or they are giving some kind of a incentive, right? But incentives do matter. In a very recent example, you will see in the case of railways in Mumbai, the Mumbai Railways installed these machines which are bottle crushers, and these bottle crushers give discount coupons, discounted tickets, and this has seen a whole lot of response in stations where they have been installed. But these are instances of individualized participation. Where it comes to collective participation, collective projects, there has to be some more thinking through about the valid reasons for participation. Again, in this connection, there is a very important concept given to us by James Scott. James Scott talks about the silent weapons of the weak. Okay. Now, this is where this is an entire instance where you have an entire statization of development and state projects. Sometimes these may also be anti-people. Now, people may not actually actively resist all of these projects, but often what you see is that resistance comes through silence, resistance comes through non-cooperation, resistance comes through non-participation. So what we have to realize in the whys of participation is why does somebody not participate is also equally important to understand, just as we understand why people participate. Sometimes you also see that participation comes as a compulsion. In places like the entire Deccan Plateau, or perhaps all over India now, watershed projects, you have to have a compulsory participation of people. Okay? Contribution of people is necessary in all of these projects. Now, in these cases, people definitely want watershed to happen in their village, but the way in which the form of participation is kind of designed, which is in terms of actually giving labor contribution. Okay? What many people end up doing, especially the privileged in the village, is that they would rather pay for things rather than giving their labor contribution. So it is the poor who end up laboring on the projects, while the privileged who actually are going to be the prime beneficiaries of watershed projects end up only paying in monetary terms. So we need to begin to think about these kind of whys of participation as well. So on a completely different track of understanding the why of participation, I'm going to talk about ways in which communities spontaneously respond, because there are no projects. And one of the very interesting examples here is described in a novel called Bangarwadi by Venkatesh Madgulkar. Now, this Bangarwadi talks about a teacher who is working in a community of Dhangars. Dhangars are a nomadic tribe, largely staying on hilltops, and who have barely begun to settle down. Within their overall nomadic pattern of life and pastoral pattern of life, education hardly has any space. And there is this teacher who goes there and begins to operate in a school and think of different collective projects. Okay? For a very long time, the teacher's efforts hardly have any results. Then the teacher comes up with the project of actually creating a exercise space, a Vyayam Shala as it is called, okay, and invites the local king. Now when I am talking of a king, this is the time in India where there were these kind of principalities which existed, and even after the principalities were dissolved, the erstwhile kings had a lot of cultural capital in particular areas, okay, and invites this king to come to the village, and the king accepts that he will come for the inauguration of this Vyayam Shala. Now that was the trigger which really spurred the community, a project which was going in an extremely lethargic manner, because the community, it was so contingent upon the community's time, when they had the resources. So something which was going on, the construction of the Vyayam Shala, for nearly a year, 40% of the work was done, but the news that the king will come to the village and inaugurate the thing had the effect that 60% of the construction of the school and the Vyayam Shala was completed in the span of a month. Okay? Now, it is instances like this that we need to also look for when we begin to understand causes of participation. We see that crisis is another thing which prompts people into participation. We move to the third question now. And the third question is about how do people participate. We have talked about who, we have talked about why, we need to also think about how people participate. And this means thinking really at two levels. One, how do project proponents think that people can participate? And the second is about what are the forms that people find it feasible to participate. And what this means is really coming to a good, sensitive meeting ground. So that the actual form of participation has to depend on a very sensitive consideration of what are the resources, what are the skills that people possess. So if participation has to be feasible, it should definitely not extract undue costs, especially from those who are vulnerable. That has to be the principle of the minima. And at a maxima, it should actually do things where people are not homogeneous, so different people are enabled to contribute what they have, and it has to be based on a principle which is much more equity based. I think it's important to look at 2-3 examples here to understand how does one think of these kind of feasible forms. So Dr. Arole in Jamkhed, as part of community rural health project, this is an extremely successful, one of the pioneers of community health in India. Now this is a project where one sees different forms of participation. So at one level, you have women community workers who come from the most excluded communities in villages, who are Dalits, who are widows, and they are women, right? So their individual participation in becoming change agents in the village. How does one secure that? How does one, and here then, if it is individuals who are going to be change agents, who are giving very different messages, then perhaps it is very critical to think of what is the self-esteem, what is that collective ethos, what are the support systems that are generated for these women community workers. Bereft of these, the entire idea of participation may just collapse. But at the same time, Dr. Arole also experimented with collective forms of participation, and these have included small committees which can take up several projects which are linked to material infrastructure, sanitation projects, improving the overall animal husbandry, and how does one think of animal health as well. It is not important to just think of human health. It was projects around improving horticulture so that incomes are raised and people can actually invest then in health resources. So it is thinking of these kind of multiple projects which then also creates and links to each other. So one has to understand that the how of people participation is not about thinking about people in isolation. Health cannot be thought of only as a health sectoral approach that imagination can impinge, but that people who want to seek health are also people who are poor, they are also people who are farmers, they are also animal breeders. So one thinks of this entire activity mix of people, and one also needs to think of a life cycle approach in terms of elderly, children, youth, men, women, and so on and so forth. Another very interesting instance in thinking about how do people participate is the example of the Orangi pilot project in Pakistan. Uh, in Orangi, uh, which is a huge unauthorized colony outside Karachi, uh, the gaps, it has presents a very typical and now familiar situation to us in terms of inadequacy of services, government efforts falling flat. Now when Akhtar Hamid Khan, who is the proponent of the Orangi pilot project, who was an architect and who really started talking about real and utilizing local knowledge. And when I say local knowledge, it is really using the skills and the resources deployed or possessed by the local masons, local proponents, organizing people on a lane basis. So every lane formed its own committee. The local masons actually designed an entire sanitation system, and to which then people individually, household wise, linked themselves. Now this is very, very different as opposed to the approach of most municipalities, which try to approach this and take experts and engineers who would then say that no sanitation system, no sewage system can basically be installed in this slum or this unauthorized colony because it has narrow lanes, it has winding lanes, the terrain is undulating, and so on and so forth. So local knowledge is extremely critical because people are making their life and building up their life in extremely adverse kind of circumstances and living with that reality. Taking them along as partners perhaps is very critical. If local knowledge is not utilized, then the Orangi pilot project would have actually fallen flat. At the same time, I think finally we need to begin to see that these dynamics of participation actually give us a whole lot of notes of caution. Okay, what kind of caution? The most important of these is that we have to recognize that participation involves costs. Often these are costs which are hidden, and when they remain hidden, when they remain not recognized, these hidden costs may ultimately derail a program completely. The second thing that one needs to remember is how to gain a knowledge of local culture, and using systems of local knowledge, using spaces which are based on that, I think is very, very critical in responding to these dynamics of participation. The third aspect perhaps in responding to these costs is envisaging participation as a rhythm. When we talk about rhythm, we need to talk about different phases of participation. So initially, participation may be like a slow trickle of some people who show interest, but often these are either the most adventurous, sometimes the most privileged. But how does one transcend to that, to see that participation becomes steady, contributory, larger scale, to then thinking of how does one build projects from that, and then to move to thinking about how systems of participation can be institutionalized. So building up this rhythm is very necessary. One cannot move directly into creating systems which are part, I mean, one can see then that you may establish systems, but systems which may not work. So one has to move in stages, one has to move in a rhythm. Also that rhythm is something which is responsive to the local rhythms of life. For example, in cities among several poor people, one will see that the rainy season is a time where many people go to their villages. Or you will see that the summers are a month again where several people are not there. Rhythm of participation needs to recognize these periods of absence. Similarly, in villages, we need to recognize the entire time of harvest, the entire time of ploughing. These are times which are intense work times, and therefore thinking of projects around these times is like committing suicide in a way. Finally, we can also need to realize that participation can actually be a tyranny, because through participation one can impose several forms, and in the name of participation actually impose several things on people. And to recognize therefore that participation actually needs to be something which people can own up and create their own spaces at their own pace is perhaps something which is very, very critical for practitioners to actually recognize. So in conclusion, I think what one should say is that when we begin to recognize all of these dynamics of who, how, why, I think it creates an awareness amongst practitioners to what are the possibilities which are there. This is something which goes beyond approaches, it goes beyond conceptual models to thinking of actual things of how, when, what form kind of a thing. And it enables practitioners to design programs accordingly. So it obviously nuances participation in a locality, in a local context, okay? But at the same time, it also evolves. It goes through a process of ongoing learning. And unless that ongoing learning is there, you cannot think of participation, including the awareness of dynamics, as something which I know and therefore I will not learn. Your knowing has to become the basis of an ongoing learning process, and perhaps that's the key to a dynamic participation process. References for this, you can refer to Alan Twelvetrees, and then you also refer to the text which has been given to you. Thank you.